Thank you, everyone. As Angela said, I am indeed from Connecticut. Whenever I tell people that, no one ever expects it because I am Black. They do not expect it, and I understand why. You know, when most people think of the state of Connecticut, they think of like a white dude with lots of money, lots of Ivy League degrees, and lots of dropped rape charges, you know? Yeah. But the reason why I made it to Connecticut is because I attended Yale University when I was younger, and this is the longest I've gone without telling a room full of people that fact about me. So you're welcome. You're welcome, okay? Going to Yale was kind of weird. Yale is in New Haven. New Haven is known for a lot of different things. It's known as being like a crime-filled place. Like when I first moved there for college, there are a lot of people that are like, oh, you should be careful because there are some dangerous areas, you know? And then I would go to those areas and there was just a Black kid riding a bike. That's all it was.
Aloha mai kako, everyone. Welcome to Not Another White Man's Podcast, where we discuss the intersectionality of race, ethnicity, gender, and religion on random AF topics. Today, we will be speaking about humor. Before we begin, let's do a round of introductions.
Hi, everybody. My name is Brandee Blocker Anderson. I am the founder and CEO of the Anti-Racism Academy, and I am excited to be talking about this topic of humor and specifically racial satire.
My name is Haleh. I am a community business developer in my town and attorney, teacher. I have absolutely no sense of humor, but I love to laugh and can't wait to talk about humor today.
Hi, my name is Kendra Dawsey. I am an educator and a stand-up comic based currently in Boston, Massachusetts. I have a website, www.myname.com. I've been doing, I'm pretty new at comedy compared to a lot of people, but I've been in the trenches, as you could say, and I'm happy to talk about this topic and bring my personal experience into it.
And my name is Seanna Pieper-Jordan. I am your resident sociologist out of Honolulu, Hawaii. I am Native Hawaiian and also Blackfeet and Lakota. Proud to be a Native woman. And I look forward to laughing because that's what I do best.
Race-based comedy can help increase awareness of the social contradictions about race, but it can sometimes be difficult to determine the extent to which race-based comedy may actually reinforce rather than challenge racial stereotypes. So what has to go wrong for racial satire to be racist? In 2014, Stephen Colbert came under fire for a tweet sent out on behalf of his show, The Colbert Report. The tweet in question: I am willing to show at Asian Community I care by introducing the Ching Chong Ding Dong Foundation for Sensitivity to Orientals or whatever, sparked a Twitter response from writer and hashtag Sui Park. The tweet was a brief recap of a joke Colbert told on the show as a satirical response to Daniel Snyder's creation of a charitable organization for Native Americans while continuing to maintain a racial slur for the name as the name of his football team. That's just one example. And I know for me, even watching the Colbert Report, I sometimes struggle to see, I guess I knew it was satire, but I think in the case of this tweet, it's like.
Yeah, the tweet without context is probably not having the context of like, oh, this was a joke where he was mocking another Native American, probably or not another Native American, but like a foundation that was supposed to be for Native Americans using like that. I mean, yeah, if you just say that without context, it's even more disorienting. Yeah.
We're talking about Rick Snyder, right? So the Washington football team.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which I think it's funny that that's what it's so bland. They couldn't think of anything.
The history about Rick Snyder and the freaking Washington football team, aka Red Law, is that he refused to change the name, and like actually some Native Native activists took him to court. So they were trying to go after the trademark with like the Redskins to say that he can't use that in the football team's name. So you had tribes and Native people suing him. They tried the media. They tried to do like more of the nice way of saying, hey, please change this. This is offensive to us. You don't know the background of this. Well, he did know the background of it, but he said that it was a business and he could do whatever he wanted with that name. Eventually, because of like the, Black Lives Matter and like the awareness that was built, he changed the name to now it's just like the Washington football team. But essentially that went on for years and years and years. And this guy was the most racist person.
Right.
And he just like refused to listen to the historical knowledge behind it. And I was just, so, I mean, he is bringing awareness, like that joke, that tweet.
But you have to understand so many things, right? And I think that's the problem with like racial satire in general, or like, it assumes a lot of your audience. And if you don't have that context, there's also this other like meaning, or it's like a double entendre, but for humor that no matter like what it's gonna land somewhere. But like I don't know. I feel like it kind of expects a lot, especially in a tweet. As opposed to maybe in a longer format where maybe you have the chance to give more context to whatever is going on. But I like Stephen Colbert personally, but was that the best way of using his platform to point out that the hypocrisy?
Wait, did he say ching chong? What was that? What did he say? Like, put it in the chat box. I need to see that.
In the clip, I think he was like, yeah, like Rick Snyder made this like whatever organization, which is kind of like, and then he went into like, it's kind of like the, Ching Chong League of, Oriental, whatever. Like, so he was like making a comparison, being like, this is as off color, right?
Right.
The tweet, I think, just like had like, oh, on behalf of the Asian American community, we're going to do this, which like, if you hadn't watched the show, you're like kind of like, what the hell is that?
Oh, okay. So Rick Snyder created this foundation, right? And it's kind of that same way where people don't want to change the racist ass shit of their organization, of what they do. So they create a foundation to help minorities to compensate for the fact that they're racist. And you're like using the stereotype of before. I think it's like people saying, in a way, I'm going to compare it to statues, like Confederate statues, where they're saying like, this is a part of history. Like he was saying, our fans like this name. This is our Washington football team's historical name. We don't want to get rid of it. It's very important. And yet you have a new group of people coming in and saying like, no. But anyway, another thing I want to point out from that tweet is there's been so many times in history where they've compared Native Americans to Asians. Like the fact that they say Indians, like, right? Like Indians was because they thought that like they were from India and that's Southeast Asia. Obviously, I'm not comparing it to Ching Chong, which is Ching is the last name of someone who is from China, like traditionally. So this is when I say Ching Chong, I'm thinking of like specifically Chinese people, but I'm just saying like in the past that there's been associations.
I do like, I remember when this whole Redskins football thing. I'm not a football fan. I had no idea that there was a team called the Redskins. The whole thing comes up. I had no idea that Redskins had anything to do with natives in this country at all. So I came to it completely clueless, right? And when I first heard it, my reaction to it was, well, could it be that there's other people who have no idea what the context is, right? And it's not that everybody who might necessarily want to keep that name is racist. But then as the controversy went on for a while, then my thought on it changed, because at some point people begin to become educated about what it is the underlying issues are. And so once you get educated to a point where you know that this name is offending a whole group of people who are looking at it in a completely different way, then I think it sort of like changes it. And by the time like a couple of weeks passed and the whole thing was out in the press, I'm like, well, just change the stupid name. What's the big deal? But I do think that takes a certain amount of like knowledge and desire to understand another
also
perspective, right? And I don't
It's
think
also regional,
I'm not sure
right?
people
So
do
like
that.
if you're in a state where there's a lot of Native Americans and it's a lot of the time like there's a high population or in the Southwest and the Northwest and kind of like because they killed off all the natives on the East Coast. And so like predominantly the current population is more into like the plains, Northwest and like Southwest and stuff like that. What was interesting, what you have to realize is like there's a knowledge of Redskins in those areas because they do have interactions with Native Americans more. So somebody on the East Coast may not have that association very easily because they're just not, connected in any way.
No, it makes complete
I don't know.
sense,
I
Seanna.
think
Like you're like
people.
second person I've ever met who's Native, and I've lived on the East Coast. I've never met or spoken with anyone, two people. So that's really,
I
and I'm
think also
enclave
like
on the East Coast. So
yeah, and I mean apart from that though, like we just living in America, so much of our national
Iconography.
and like mythology of how this nation was created, like a lot of it is cowboys and Indians and like kind of like
Pilgrims and Indians.
thinking
Like
about
literally
like
first grade teachers make students dress up like pilgrims and Indians, like in this country, no matter where you go to school, it's like a thing.
and then even the fact that the mascot was a Native man. I feel like Haleh obviously like you came from a different country and then moved here, so like you don't have a lot of that context. But for people who have been living in America, like shouldn't be, if you think about it like a little bit, then you're like, this probably all right. They're referring to a Native American person.
Right. And for me, the only thing that I ever knew about Native American was what I remembered from history class, like the 2 or 3 classes that it was covered. It was like literally a test in school. I took the test and that was it. And whatever I happened to remember was really the only exposure I ever had to Native culture. Even like the cowboy and Indian movies and shows, I've seen maybe 2 in my life, right? So it wasn't but with that said, like it doesn't excuse it that once people become aware and they understand what it is, then it's not excusable. Get rid of the name and pick a different name.
When we're talking about Native humor, right? Like so I've said this before on podcasts, like natives have some dark humor. I think when somebody else is making fun of natives, it's like much different. And we can go into that, like the context and who says it. But in order to talk about appropriation and like the racist ass shit that people do, a lot of natives are just like dark and they make fun of like white people appropriating. And so this meme came out and I literally was rolling on the floor laughing. And it's just saying like, my brother had a naming ceremony for the, okay, so this is this guy from the riot or the Capitol insurgent is like wearing these fucking horns. And he says in an interview prior to this, that this was because he wanted to show Native American, like he purposely said his outfit was associated with being Native American in interviews. So then this guy's running around in the insurgent and great, he's locked up because that's what he deserves. And then, so this is what was being passed. My sister actually texted me this, and it's, my brother had a naming ceremony for this guy, dances with Karens. And like, for me, that is so funny. Like, it's just the most hilarious thing I ever said, because it's like it's making fun of appropriation, it's making fun of Karens, and it's making fun of racism, but from our context, so we can laugh at it.
Right.
And I don't know,
right.
Haleh, if you guys saw this without me bringing it up, would you think it was funny?
So if I saw it without you bringing it, I would think that, oh, someone's being clever. I wouldn't like roll down laughing. I mean, which goes to show that like humor, like a lot depends on culturally who's saying it, where it's coming from. I would have think it's clever. I would have been like, oh, that's a smart guy. Ha ha ha. But it would not have me rolling on the ground cracking up the way you're saying it. But that's because humor is very cultural, I think.
I think that I think it's funny. And one of the things that that's one of the differences I see between like what this person is doing, or I think, Seanna, a lot of the things that you mentioned to frame this meme are a contrast to Stephen Colbert in the sense of, well, I think a lot of people like readily know the Dances with Wolves like film, and and they are able to like latch onto it, so it doesn't need as much context, even though it's pretty much the equivalent of a tweet as far as like, I mean, obviously the picture helps, but then this person is native and they are, like using this to make fun of this dude who, was trying to appropriate Native culture. In the case of Stephen Colbert, even though I know that he wasn't trying to offend Asian American people, it's like, don't just pull them into conversations. They didn't ask to be a part of this conversation about this like dickhead football coach. Two, like you pick like a sort of like one of the most like racist, sort of slurs that are used against Chinese people, like this idea that, a lot of Asian Americans like still have to deal with. And, even people immigrating here, people just assuming they can't speak English and, making fun of them. It's so tired and lazy, but it's like so many people don't get all of the layers of the joke in a tweet in order to get it. And so like on his show, I think he can set it all up and people sort of like know him for being like using like the edgy humor kind of guy. But as a white guy, like he needs to be more responsible.
So
in my
Also,
opinion.
he uses the word Orientals in here
It's
too.
too much. It's too much.
Shauna, if Stephen Colbert had put out this meme, would it have been equally as funny to you?
I think so. I would have been dying of laughter.
Well, it's also like, so the person who put this tweet out that was referencing a joke on the show was probably some Comedy Central intern. The person who wrote the joke was probably not Asian because they're, a lot of writing rooms for comedic television shows and late night shows are, I think to this day, predominantly white men, except for like Samantha Bee. And like, it's getting better with some shows, but I think like at 2014, the situation was even worse. And like, I guess like, if people like, what comedians should always think about is like, oh, is there a way where I can make the same point and the same joke and have like a funny joke without, while, making sure that there's not like a Twitter controversy about it. And I think in the beginning, a lot of comedians' response was like audiences, oh, they're like too sensitive. But I think like social media, I don't think it's necessarily people being more sensitive. It's like people being able to be on social media and being like, oh, like, hey, this is what I have a problem with this, right? Like, 30 years ago when there wasn't really that much social media, if you saw something that you didn't like online, or if you saw something that you didn't like on TV, if you really wanted, you could write a letter to like CBS and like, but yeah, I guess there's a lot of questions of like audience, like a lot of Stephen Colbert's audience is mostly like white people. And I mean, probably even Trevor Noah at this point is like a lot of white people who like are liberal and like want to think that they're like woke. So, yeah, it's a lot of like complicated issues with all of this. So,
well, so I think this is a good sort of segue into the issues of blackface and black scent.
Mm-hmm.
It makes me think of all right, so we'll get into this particular example, but it makes me think of a YouTuber named Shane Dawson, who has recently come under a lot of fire for doing blackface in a lot of his early YouTube content. And so we can look at some of his clips later, but I think there's a sort of difference between what Shane Dawson was doing, which is more akin to the traditional straight up blackface, and what a lot of shows like The Office and 30 Rock and It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia have done in sort of this sort of like new age blackface, where it's like
ironic racism.
Ironic racism. I like that as a term, and so I think that ties in to a lot of what we're talking about as far as mainly white writers' rooms leveraging, what does it mean for mainly white writers' rooms to leverage race and racial humors to either call out or just like be able to get away with quote unquote being racist. And so just to give us a little more context for the conversation around blackface specifically, traditionally blackface is a form of theatrical makeup used predominantly by non-Black performers, because Black performers have Black skin already. To portray a caricature of a Black person. So Blackface in the United States, Blackface gained popularity in the 19th century and contributed to the spread of racial stereotypes, such as the happy-go-lucky darky on the plantation or the dandified coon. But by the middle of the century, Blackface minstrel shows had become a distinctive American art form, translating formal works such as opera into popular terms for general audiences. By the early 20th century, Blackface branched off from minstrel shows and became a form in its own right. In the United States, Blackface declined in popularity beginning in the 1940s and into the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. It's generally considered highly offensive, disrespectful, and racist by the turn of the 21st century, though the practice or similar ones continues in other countries and in this one. So that was just a little blurb from the Wikipedia article, but I think for the purposes of our conversation, we're not as much talking about the sort of old school forms of Blackface, but like various examples we see in movies like Tropical Thunder or in the TV shows that I listed before, and whether or not these are examples of just straight up, making fun of Black people, perpetuating Black stereotypes, and, ultimately harmful or detrimental to Black people. Or is it, the latter, and we can talk about the different examples and whether or not they're actually making fun of the racist characters on the shows.
The Office one was like a very short clip, and I feel like seeing someone in full blackface walk into a parking lot, get a text, and then turn around without context is like confusing. But yeah, there was that clip. For 30 Rock did I think they had a few instances, and there was a reel of that, and then.
Good morning. What is going on here? Jenna and I are doing a social experiment.
No, you're not. Wait, what is Jenna doing?
You gotta ease on down the road.
Long lay the world in sin and darkness pining.
Abner, I'm home from work. Where are you, my brother? Here I is, Alfie. Oh, hell no, I'm not doing this.
Like Community, there was a character who was supposed to be portraying like an elf, but they had worn entirely black paint on their face and elf ears. Yeah, so there's a lot of instances, right? I think it's also interesting that a lot of outcry about it came up around the protests, the anti-police brutality protests and Black Lives Matter protests that started over the summer, where people had very explicit demands of hey, we want police to stop hurting us, and then shows were I'm gonna cut this these 5 minutes of these jokes from my show because I really care about Black people, right? So I guess thinking about I guess as a performer, I don't think about it just in terms of the actual construction of the joke. Probably most of those jokes were written by white people, maybe not exclusively, but but also just how the shows kind of try to sweep things under the rug. Or
I know I used to work for a partner at a law firm who was out of pocket. He just would say really insensitive things, and I mean he was the boss, and some people would laugh, but it's he's being dead serious. And so there's been this whole backlash, anti-PC movement, and a lot of people just want to be able to be racist and make racist jokes, and what do you want? I'm take it or leave it kind of thing. And I think that you have to be careful when you're trying to do the opposite of that. If those guys are laughing harder at your jokes, then what are you really doing?
Exactly.
I do think though that there's been some movement, at least in workplaces, because there's a lot of sensitivity training going on now, which didn't used to happen. Now, is it the best kind of training? Does it actually accomplish anything? I don't know. I mean, time will tell. But the fact that people are concerned about it and are actually having the conversations, I think that's pretty telling. And I also have a couple of kids who are in college right now, and all these conversations are happening in colleges right now, where college kids, before they even like sign in, like your first day of school, they give you like sensitivity stuff that you have to watch videos and like check off that you watched it. Some schools are requiring classes that you have to go through. And I think that this next generation over the next like 5-6 years who come into the workforce are going to continue the conversation more than it was in the past. Though I do agree with you, there is simultaneously like kind of a backlash happening because I think that's sort of like the pendulum of things. But I think the conversation is not going to go away anymore.
I think talking about college though, and I'm going back to Brandee's point about power and like people who are in power. So like Yale, we've talked about this on a previous episode. What was this, 2014, 2015, not even 6 years ago? Yeah. And then the fact that like there was a backlash by somebody in power, a professor, saying like it's okay to wear blackface because it's a freedom of speech. And if you guys want to go back to previous clips, we have like a whole explanation of that. So like in college. And then I also want to point out something that happened in my workplace with somebody who was the head of this firm, and a woman has the right in HR code to have children. And he said, I don't want her to have a second child because I want her to stay here. I want her to work. I don't want her to take time off. So don't have a second child. And everyone laughed. I was like, oh, wow. This is supposed to be funny.
Technically illegal. That is technically illegal.
Yeah.
Like I'm okay with Seanna, like this guy at Yale, like saying so, because I think that people are always going to say something, and I would prefer people say something and the conversation happens and the backlash happens than it not be said out loud without people saying anything.
So I think that's actually a good segue into a clip that I wanted to show. So I know so two stories. First story, this is not my class at Yale, but I think the class before mine, before all of the freshmen started, they being the Yale administration had assigned to all the students why are all the kids sitting together in the cafeteria in other conversations about race by Dr. Beverly Tatum. Shout out to her.
I have that book. Yeah.
And there was and they made them read it before they started. And then there was like a Facebook group, and let's just say it was like a nightmare or like a shit show, I guess is a better word for it. Because I think the problem is that if you give things like that and don't get enough context for kids who are coming from like Fox News Trump land, and then kids who are coming from like nothing, no prior knowledge at all, and then kids who are coming from maybe like potentially more knowledge coming together and then having to unpack these complex conversations. Like I just felt like that probably wasn't well handled, and it ended up like really alienating a lot of the Black students from their classmates like right off the bat. Because it's like, holy crap, like I'm here with my race. So it's like, is it better to know that they're racist and like don't like care about any of the struggles? Or like, could we have still like been able to go to school together? And like my freshman year for Cultural Connections, they had us, they being the people who ran this pre-orientation program for students of color at Yale before school starts. They sat us down and had us watch this movie called Bamboozled that's actually made by Spike Lee. And let me see. And it's fitting for the topic at hand. I don't know like how appropriate it was for us. This is Bamboozled because I think it hits on a lot of the themes that we've been talking about, but from a slightly different perspective. So let me know if you can hear.
I want a show that will make headlines. The Huxtables, Cosby, a genius, revolutionary, but we can't go down that road again.
The network does not want to see Negroes on television unless they are buffoons.
Have you ever thought about just quitting?
I have a contract. The only way I get out of that is if I get fired, and that is what I intend to do. I know you're familiar with minstrel shows, variety shows, like In Living Color.
Right. That was dope.
Man Tan. The new millennium minstrel show.
We're gonna need a little more money for this.
This could be bigger than Friends, Ally McBeal, even my boys Amos and Andy.
Damn. You're putting white actors in blackface?
We're using black actors with blacker faces.
This fall.
Right on, man.
Yeah, great show.
You won't believe what's coming to your television.
Sleep and Eat and Mantan are lazy and unemployed.
Do your stuff.
But we are certainly not saying anything about the entire African American community.
What's sweeping the nation? And what's coloring the way you see the world.
Yo, we can't let this injustice go by, man. Not this time, man.
You know what I'm saying?
Nah, man. You know what I'm saying? You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying?
You notice that everybody white want to be black. How about raising up? They all act better, sound better.
When are you gonna come into the light?
The light.
The light.
Your hands are just as bloody as mine.
Cousins, I want you all to go to your windows. We talking about revolution. Go to your windows and yell out, I am not gonna take it anymore!
I don't want anything to do with anything black for at least a week.
Okay, first off, that is a 90s ass trailer.
That was
which
mad.
is yeah, it was like it was made in 1998 or something, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. That is very weird that Yale told the cultural connections to watch that is like without any background or framing or context. That's not a show, that's not a movie you give to a lot of non-Black people, and they're like, talk about it. Like, you need to frame it.
So this actually was made in 2000, and so
okay.
So just to give a little more context, the whole premise of the film was that this network executive pitches this idea to have a modern day minstrel show to the networks, and in his mind, he's doing it to get fired. But the network, they take it, they take it seriously, and they're like, "Oh, great!" And so the whole film was supposed to be a satire on like in a commentary on the television industry and how it uses specifically Black talent and Black culture to whether that's in a way that is like, to further race relations in a positive way, or to just continue to hold Black people down. And I think that it's another interesting tie-in that's very timely is so recently Dave Chappelle came out and announced that he actually, his show is back on Netflix. So for context, Dave Chappelle had a show called The Chappelle Show on Comedy Central. It was a super, super popular show. A lot of the show largely featured a lot of racial satire, which we'll get into. And I could definitely see like Dave Chappelle somehow like tying in blackface and making it somehow like, fresh and original and funny. I don't think he ever touched it. He definitely did whiteface, was
But I don't know if whiteface causes the same problems, because blackface, the historical origins was racist, right? And I think that's the problem. I don't know if, like, without the historical origins, whether someone dressing up to look like, is that cultural appropriation? If someone like dresses up to look like another culture, or like does makeup to look like another culture, in and of itself, is that necessarily bad? Or would you call that amazing acting? I don't know.
They do it all the time with like natives. They'll pick somebody who looks native, like have certain features, and then have them do native actors. It happens all the time.
Right. It happens. Right. And so like, I think it's the historical aspect of blackface that makes it special.
I think when it comes to any group of people of color, there is a history of white people oppressing them, and they're taking their land, taking their bodies, taking their resources. And so when you have white people who are either like doing it themselves, and so you see examples of red face, yellow face, blackface. I mean, like these are jobs like literally being taken away from Black people. And in a lot of instances, like it's just, again, just used to like make fun of the worst qualities that, and it's all through like the white gaze, this lens of what people think that people of color are supposed to be. But to go back to Dave Chappelle, like he kind of like he did a lot of he dabbled in a lot of this world of like, okay, how far can I push the envelope as far as racial humor? But in the end, he felt like one, he didn't have the creative control that he needed in the show, and two, he got to a point where he started to question whether or not they were laughing with him, they being the audience, or at him. And so he ended up walking away from the Chappelle show, like sort of at the height, and he took a pretty long hiatus from comedy, and then came back a few years ago with a special on Netflix. And most recently, he made a statement to Netflix saying, please take all of my content down from the Chappelle show because I don't own residuals from Comedy Central. Like they basically have never made things right with me. And comedy and Netflix, I'm supposing they made some kind of deal with Comedy Central to get Dave Chappelle his money, because Dave Chappelle made an announcement a couple weeks ago saying that his show will be back up on Netflix, and that he has now been paid the money that he is due. And so I think it brings up the question of like, who is entitled to do racial humor? Is it only people of color who should be doing this, or are there certain parameters that all people should follow? Because if even Dave Chappelle, or in the case of the main character from Bamboozled, like he felt like he was being like used and like exploited, at what point does it sort of go from being or like so who? There's a lot of questions. You guys can answer whichever one.
I mean, it's a fundamental question, right? Like anyone is like, I can make fun of myself, but do I want you making fun of me? So the same joke coming out of one person's mouth is funny, but same exact joke out of someone else's mouth, then it becomes racist or sexist or anti-Semitic or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I mean, and then the other layer of it is who's doing the laughing. If it's your own people laughing, then it's okay. But if it's not your own people laughing, then all of a sudden it's not okay. And I'm okay with that, right? Because you don't know people's intent. So everyone's like, but it makes it tricky, doesn't it?
I think it's funny, like we've talked about this, but like when you scan, sometimes they scan the audiences, right? And you see who and who isn't laughing about these jokes. Like sometimes I've watched some stand up with natives. And then you have Native and white people in the audience and some other ethnicities. And then Native people are laughing, but the other people have like this awkward face, like they don't know whether they should laugh, but they also don't know why the timing is the way it is. But then I also wonder, I've laughed sometimes because I feel awkward.
There's awkward laughing. Yeah. Cringe laughing.
Have you laughed at a funeral? I've actually laughed at funerals, which is horrible because like when you feel like so awkward, like sometimes you end up laughing in the most inappropriate times.
No, I mean, you go to a Native funeral and everyone's laughing. Like it just depends on the culture, because like
That's so interesting.
I think if you look at some of the videos that we've done, like the podcasts, we're talking about heavy crap, and then all of a sudden I'll laugh or smile. I think that that's what's different. Each culture is different when it comes to humor, because we're just like, this is so absurd that all you can do is laugh at it, because you're like, this is just bull.
It's really interesting what you say about culture and cultural humor and what people laugh at. And I think that's probably one of the complexities in America. And I wonder whether other countries have some of these complexities that we have, because it's a very diverse space here, and not all countries are as diverse as here. I don't get American humor oftentimes because there's a lot of sarcasm in it. And sarcasm is a form of American laughter. Whereas in Iran, that is just straight up rude. And someone's being sarcastic, and I'm just like, to this day, I'm like, oh, that's not nice. You shouldn't say that. And people are like, oh, we're just joking, Haleh, lighten up. I'm like, oh, that was a joke. I didn't realize, right? So I think like some of these issues, like especially in America, because we're a diverse place, come up where we don't know why other people are laughing and what the intent is.
Yeah. I think that's true for other countries. Like I've seen Indian stand-ups, and I think there are some, I mean, yeah, like every country has its own in-groups. There are some jokes I think people would think would be funnier if it came out of the mouth of someone who is Punjabi versus Gujarati. There's also like issues of class. There's issues of caste. There's issues of, gender. Like if a guy comedian is making jokes about how like women are like so high, like, women don't listen to their husbands anymore, then I'm gonna think he's kind of a dick, right? But if a woman comedian in India like kind of made those same jokes, then it's like, okay, she's making those jokes because she fits that bill, and like she's probably gonna make jokes about her parents asking her to get married and her not wanting to. A lot of times people don't like white men saying racial slurs. If you're mad about it, you could do an outright turn, go onto YouTube, go onto Stormfront, which like some people do. If you don't want fans that will be at a Capitol Hill riot, then like stop saying racial slurs. It's not hard. Like I know you mentioned Shane Dawson. Mm-hmm. I don't follow YouTubers at all. Whenever I hear of a guy younger than me being on YouTube, I'm like, there's probably a blackface video of him somewhere that I'm not interested in looking at, right? Because a lot of them did get like a lot of fans from being edgy online. So yeah, that strikes, and he's probably like mad that people are mad at him for it. But it's like, dude, you can't just like get fans on like freaking Breitbart or whatever. So
you said something interesting about like being edgy online, and I wonder if people are pushing the boundaries of what you would have normally thought was acceptable now, because you have to be a little bit more edgy in order to get that, and that's what gets you the attention, right?
Well, I think it's also like online. You are more able to easily find people that are mad about like quote unquote political correctness, and we also kind of see this with like the rise of like Trump too, right? Like, racism has been on a rise in general. There's a lot of people who like know to kind of hide, their like, oh, anti-PC, whatever at work, but then they'll like log on and like, make a lot of like, if you're on YouTube, you could kind of find those people. And there's also, there's also comedians who like kind of have been going that route, or like comedians who they're like, the more you like read into them, it's like, okay, yeah, this guy probably like, if he's complaining about people being canceled for being Nazis, then he's probably kind of a Nazi.
Yeah.
Or at least a Nazi sympathizer,
One thing it made me think about was this another stand-up comic. His name is Gerard Carmichael. He did a stand-up special for HBO, and then he got a show, but like his brand of humor, and a lot of Black comedians like employ racial humor, and I think that's a common thread between like Black people, Jewish people, and Native people. Like, that dark humor, and like, we can joke about us, but like, don't you do it kind of thing. Exactly. Which I definitely want to get to the Seinfeld clips because they were like hilarious. But like, again, like that show had a lot of Jewish people working on it. So it's like, it comes across different. But anywho, this particular clip is from his stand-up special.
That's how great America is. This is a true story. One time I was walking outside and I was minding my own business. And by the way, every young Black male has a story that starts that way. And I was minding my own business, and out of nowhere, these 4 police officers came out of nowhere and they pulled guns on me. And they forced me down onto the ground. And they handcuffed me, and I remember getting a scratch on my face from my face hitting the sidewalk. And then they stood me up and they flashed this floodlight in my eyes. And it was all because I fit a description. And that happens every single day here. And I would rather go through that every single day in America than get my master's degree in North Korea. You understand what I'm saying? Like, I'm starting to appreciate slavery for the blessing in disguise that it was. And I know that sounds cold. It's like, how can a man say he appreciates slavery? But you guys gotta understand, if it weren't for slavery, you guys, I would be in Africa right now. Africa. Are you hearing what I'm saying to you? Like, they have AIDS there. And not the happy, I'm gonna buy the Dodgers AIDS. I'm talking the real deal. Like the scary AIDS. It's Africa. You know what makes me appreciate America? Is that I realize that it's kind of fucked up. And I've accepted that. And I've moved on. As you should. I've moved on. You know what I mean? Like, you can't think about like what America does, you know? You can't love America with your mind. Because if you do, you're gonna see some shit that's gonna fuck with you. Like, you gotta love America the way your grandmother loved your grandfather, you know? Like you gotta overlook some shit, you know? Like, do the kids across the street have his eyes? I don't know, just keep praying and talking to Jesus, you know? That's how you love America. Like, I know that a lot of the world thinks America's kind of fucked up. Right? And I gotta be honest, my relationship with America is kind of weird. You know, my relationship with America is best compared to a husband and an abused wife. You know, it's like, sure, to the rest of the world, America may seem like an asshole, but you don't know America like I do. America's good to me. Sometimes I just need to learn to shut the fuck up and make America a sandwich.
Employ them.
No way a white comic could make any of those jokes.
Yeah, no,
It's just not possible. You can't even
also-
laugh at it if you're white, I don't think. Like,
The last joke he said was also similar to a joke Chris Rock has made in an interview, but it's fine.
I know.
I understand it's a similar topic among Black comics. Yeah, I thought it was funny. But also, like, part of it is, like, yeah, comics are supposed to say things that, like, you might think are funny even if you disagree. I disagree. I have a joke about wishing I were in Africa so I wouldn't need a North Face jacket.
Oh, God.
And it's like, yeah, like, I know Africa may still have problems, but I could be laid up, like, under a mango tree speaking one of 400 native African languages, not needing North Face. Like, that's what I want in my life. But yeah, I mean, yeah, no, a white person making that joke would be on Prager University. Like, that, there's no way. And I think the fact, like, him talking about those, like, kind of darker feelings is, like, part of what makes it funny. And I also noticed there was one joke he made where, like, the audience pulled back a little bit, but he was kind of still smiling. And they probably edited it, but he probably said something in between that's like, no, don't pull back on me now, to try to, like, get them back on board. But yeah.
What do you think about that? Like, when comics do that, like they like test the audience. Like, do you do that? Like, you know,
I've done that. I haven't been in front of a live audience in forever because of the pandemic. But yeah, I think, like, every comic does that. I've definitely had jokes that, I mean, maybe not even on the topic of race, but other topics where it's like, it's about something pretty dark, and then you have to kind of see, like, oh, how does this audience react if I say it this way? How does the audience react if I say it this way? Like, could I, like, have them pull back and then, like, join on when I say, like, the second part of the joke, you know? I think that's just, like, part of comedy. But having an audience pull back because you said something dark is different from having an audience pull back because you said, like, 5 racial slurs in a row. That's the biggest thing.
I do want to comment upon what Haleh, you just said, which was, can I would say, like, non-Black people laugh, right? So I'm not white and I'm listening to this. And then the question is like, could I laugh at that? I think when they say something, when they're talking about, like, white culture or, like, white people or America, I can relate. Or, like, when they start talking about, like, being poor, I can relate. You know, like, there's, like, different texts in it. So I didn't feel comfortable laughing at that. I was more, like, shocked, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe. But that's how I do with stand-ups. I just, like, wait. I was like, okay, where's the punchline? Like, where are you going with this?
Yeah.
Like, I'm in anticipation.
I think it's super tricky. Like, maybe I would laugh if I'm sitting in a room with a couple of people that are just like me, my background, my culture, my everything. But I don't know whether I would laugh in a mixed audience room. Because then you think to yourself, all right, I'm laughing, but you might take my laughter as racist. You're not going to know what part of it I'm laughing at. And you might attribute something negative to my laughter when I was just lightheartedly laughing at another part of it. Or I was laughing, but don't take me as racist because I'm laughing about this. And I think that's what gets tricky about being in a mixed group. Like, that's probably why you like your friends from childhood, where you get together with an old friend and you can just laugh till morning, because you're coming from exactly the same place. But life gets complicated when there's a different audience listening to it. So I don't know, like, it depends who's sitting next to me on whether or not I would laugh. It depends who the audience is, because I wouldn't want to be perceived as being insensitive or mean or rude when, I don't know, when it could be looked at in that light.
That's really interesting. And I wonder if that goes through audiences' heads at comedy shows, or maybe they just don't, those people are worried about that, don't go. But I do know that oftentimes
it depends.
Yeah, if they're drinking, then they care less.
It depends if you're drinking. Right, if you're drinking, you care less.
Well, sometimes Black comedians in particular will do this thing where they're like, "Where are the white people at?" And then do like the sort of like spotlight on them. And I wonder, it's like, but I think it's a little bit different when it's a white comedian and a predominantly white audience, and these kinds of jokes are happening, as opposed to a Black comedian and a predominantly Black audience versus a Black comedian and a predominantly white audience. Like, and so just looking at someone like a Gerard Carmichael, knowing that like this special, and it was a lot of this kind of like shock humor that I think you saw. I see a lot from like white stand-ups actually saying these kinds of jokes, but like in an ironic way. Like, you don't know if it's sarcastic, but like sort of getting away with it. And but Gerard Carmichael was able to get a show on like, I think it was like NBC. Like,
I have it pulled up here. NBC.
Yeah, so like
for about 2 years.
He got white famous off of this comedy special. So a lot of white folk definitely thought that this was funny.